Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. My name is Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening. I could not be more excited. This is an episode we had on the books for effectively 10 weeks, maybe even longer, because basically from the first week of X-Men 97, we knew that it was going to be a show not only just to watch and be excited about, but also like maybe the best X-Men thing that's been made. I mean, outside of the comics I can't even, maybe Logan was the last like really good
Yeah,
X-Men thing. And then before that, who even knows? But
yeah.
so to talk about X-Men 97, of course, is the person I always talk about X-Men with. He is a longtime Nerdist staff writer, comic book aficionado, and good buddy, Eric Diaz. Hey, bud. How's it
Hey,
going?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
Doing good. Doing very well. This is one of the quickest, we're going to record and release an episode. The finale episode of X-Men 97 season 1 just dropped today, and this will go out today as we record, and then you will be hearing it in your feeds on Thursday the next day. So this is a very quick turnaround because we wanted to make sure that we got this, in your feeds quickly so that you could, be excited and listen to us be excited about the show. But I said this in a video that I made about just like what I think X-Men 97 is doing well, and what I hope the MCU will take from it. But I thought I would enjoy X-Men 97 on a nostalgia level.
Yeah,
I was kind of like, oh, it'll be fine. But I did not expect it to be like scratching all of my X-Men itches the way that it has. And not only is it like great storytelling and great characterization, but it's also like a gorgeous TV show. And like when they really get to the action sequences, it is beautiful and like
yes,
harrowing and everything that you would want.
yeah, absolutely. It's really been, if you're a longtime X-Men fan like us, it's just been like a weekly gift. I look forward to Tuesdays at midnight because I'm on West Coast. Tuesday at midnight is when it drops, and I'm just there. Like I'm there texting my friends who love it. Like, oh my god, it's been a while since there's been a show like that. And it's just delivered in so many ways that I wasn't expecting. I'm like, oh, this will be fun. It'll be cute. Same as you. Like, I just thought, like, okay, I didn't know that it was gonna be this good. That it was going to deliver on so many
Yeah.
things. And I don't think Marvel
Yeah.
knew.
Like, I don't think they did either. Like, and I think just as the weeks went on, like, that became very clear, like, oh, this is not just something people are going to watch casually. And I guess, in fairness to them, it's not like their other Marvel animated series, that have come out recently have been like smash hits or anything like that.
No, I mean it's really just been What If, and that didn't really like set anyone's world on fire. And I thought they're like, oh, what is? They just didn't. I don't think it caught them by surprise. I think just things that they usually do for these, like, okay, here in California, like at Avengers Campus at California Adventure, every time a new Marvel series drops, those characters are at Avengers Campus the day of, and like there's been
Mm.
nothing for X-Men, and I'm like, well, X-Men is perfect for that. Like, why didn't you have the X-Men characters? Like, I just think that they didn't know that it was gonna strike the chord that it has. And the way that you really know a show has struck a chord like that is the amount of memes. The memes for X-Men
Mm.
97, the online discourse around it, like, has been crazy, in a way that I don't think maybe Loki, maybe WandaVision season, when WandaVision came out, it was similar. They haven't had another show that's like captured the zeitgeist in that way or had the fans as passionate in that way. And it's been great because it's
Yeah.
for everything. I know it's not an MCU show technically, it's in whatever, it's in the multiverse or whatever, but it is very Marvel Studios in at their best, because when Marvel Studios, especially like in Infinity Saga, what they did so great was they cherry picked from so many great comics to create their own cohesive storyline that everyone was invested in. That's exactly what they just did this season. I mean, the amount of comic stuff that they, from all kinds of different eras, from decades apart, like, and it's a cohesive story that you can watch from beginning to end, you know and it makes sense in that way. But they were very good at that, in a very
Mm.
MCU way. Like I was just like, this is what Kevin Feige's good at. I don't know how much he had to do with the show, but like just that thing of like, okay, here's this piece from Uncanny number whatever in 1980 thing. Here's this from New X-Men from Grant Morrison's. Like, we're going to take all of these elements and create a story around it, which even the original series kind of didn't do. The original series just kind of straight up adapted stories kind of as they were.
Yeah.
Phoenix Saga is the Phoenix Saga. They swapped out some characters that weren't there, but it's basically that. You know, this is different. This is them creating their own story out of, pop cultural parts, that have been there
Mhm.
that the movies have largely ignored, you know. Um,
Yeah. I like Days of Future Past. They adapted directly and just replaced Mystique with or no, Shadowcat, I guess, right? With Bishop. I think that's the big issue, or the big. It
yeah,
doesn't really matter now.
every Days of Future Past adaptation is swapped Kitty with somebody. Like in the cartoon, it was Bishop instead of
Mhm.
Kitty, and in the movie was Logan. Like they always somebody else gets
Right.
to do it.
Yeah.
um,
And you know, but effectively that was that. And like you said, like Phoenix Saga and Dark Phoenix Saga, and then there's and otherwise it was just sort of like taking the bits and putting it together, like they did Muir Island, they did, a Cure
yes,
thing, they did, Savage Land stuff. They did all the things, but for the most part they didn't like directly adapt anything. It was just sort of like whatever. This is directly adapting specific bits, like,
yeah,
and you and I have talked extensively throughout the season about like what exactly is this element from or this element from, and it's
mhm.
like it's more than one storyline per episode often.
Oh
Which
yeah,
is really fascinating. And it's like they go as early as Storm losing her powers was like 180 something in the
yeah,
mid 80s, and then obviously Ease for Extinction, you mentioned the Grant Morrison stuff, was in
that's
2001, so they're
yeah.
going from a 25-year span or whatever.
Yes, and Bastion, all that is late 90s.
Yeah.
Inferno, late 80s. You know what I mean? Like they're
Hmm.
just taking from all these different sources, and they're kind of fixing certain things. Like I think the show treated Madeline Pryor a lot better than the comics did.
Oh, by a
Ultimately,
lot. Yeah.
by like a lot. I mean, they speed run through those stories. Like they
Hmm.
really like if that's the one complaint I have is that you know it's a little on fast forward. But then again, the comics, those stories took years, and I don't want that either. Like, I don't think we wanted
Yeah.
3 seasons of Storm without her powers. In the comics, she didn't have them for 3 years.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. Other thing, Madeline and all that went on for years and years and years. Because Chris Claremont was like, I'm never quitting. I think that was his mindset. Like, I'm going to let this play out for years. But I think that they probably went into this season making X-Men 97, not knowing there'd be a second season, not know, like just put everything we want into this season because we don't know. They probably kind of had an idea by the end of it, but like when they started this, I bet you anything they were just like, I don't know. So let's not hold off. In this streaming age, you don't hold off for season 4 because you have no idea if you're going to get a season 4. Nothing
Yeah.
lasts that long. So you
No.
do everything that you want as much as possible. That's what I think. That's what it felt like to me. But it works basically. Like, I don't really have that many complaints.
Yeah.
It does work.
I know there was, especially with the Inferno thing. It's like, because in the comics that was a company wide event that, spanned multiple issues. I think
Yes.
in total it went from like, it was basically a 10 months of an entire calendar year was spent in Inferno land. And this
Yes.
was all entirely compacted into one episode, a longish episode, but still
Yeah.
only one episode. But I think it got to the heart of what that story is. It's like all the extraneous stuff with like magic and the character
Mhm.
magic,
The
not actual
concept of
magic,
magic, yeah.
and also the concept of magic, but also just like the city turning into like a hell dimension and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Like
they
all of
didn't
that
do
is
any
not
of that.
really important. It's much more like it got to the heart of what that story meant for the actual X-Men characters, and specifically for
Yes.
Scott and Jean and Madeline. And I think that's ultimately what I think the show is doing so well is that it's like it's taking these big, huge, kind of ridiculous at times comic book arcs and kind of boiling them down to their like essences and applying them to characters
Yes.
we already love and care about. Um, you know, and the fact that they did that, like that episode is so like visually stunning as well as like really
Yeah.
exciting
There's
and you know
it might be the
troubling and
best
all that stuff.
animated it might be the best animated episode, or at least fight scene wise of the season. You know, I thought the
I
third
would
one
have thought
was
so too, but it's tough to say because that one's really great. Episode 5 is obviously really great. That's
so
the
good.
destruction of Genosha. And then episode 7 is the one where Rogue goes on a rampage, and that one's really great too. But then,
Yeah.
like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's great fights and everything. Like episode 1 has some amazing sequences, and
Yep.
it's some of, I mean, it is just some of the best. Like you were saying, people who grew up watching and reading X-Men comics and watching the cartoon are, this is like the fulfillment of everything that we wanted that cartoon to
Mhm.
be, and it,
Yes.
storytelling wise, character wise, design wise, that show is amazing, and they know it now. But they didn't have the budget to do any of the big action sequences,
No, they
like,
didn't have the budget,
you
and
know.
they knew that the primary audience was kids, and they couldn't do a lot of that, so they just couldn't touch on those things. They
Yeah,
had to make it entertaining to kids, and this show knows that it's primarily for those kids who are now adults, without making it like they don't. I don't feel like it's too adult. I mean, we did have Wolverine skewer Magneto, so that's definitely not something they would have done on the old show. Like you
yeah,
would have seen Logan's bloody claws pop out of Magneto's torso on Fox Kids, but you know, more or less, the tone is pretty consistent with what the old show was. You know, I
yeah,
feel
I yeah,
they
yeah.
just take it to
It's
another level.
mostly the early 90s show never talked down to the audience. It was obviously for kids, but it never, like, it still
Yeah.
hit these really like you know, dark and sort of important you know, story beats and everything. And I think that, yeah, you're right, like they up the language a little bit, they up the violence, but other than that, and the sex, like they obviously allude to much more, like
Yes.
it's fairly confirmed, I think, or at least it's visually suggested heavily that like Morph and Wolverine bone fairly frequently. It seems like.
Yeah, whether I don't know if they bone or not. I definitely Morph. I think, especially by the last episode, it's like clear that Morph has feelings for Logan.
Yeah,
Whether Logan is aware of them, I don't know. Like Logan's sort of like so in like his own little world of pining for Jean that I don't know if he realizes is like, yeah, this shapeshifter that you're friends with is like into you. Like I think they did as much as they could when with Jean kind of transforming into, or I mean, Morph transforming into Jean and being like, "I love you." I was like, "Oh, okay, wow, we're going there."
yeah,
Um, but yeah, there's definitely things they could not have done.
no,
Like,
yeah. Eh, just, yeah, all that stuff, all you just kind of like, you know, the stuff with Rogue and Magneto, I thought was really that
yes,
was a weird choice, but I dug it because like these are grown-ups, you know what I mean? Like there's not
yeah,
and one of the best things about the comics, especially at that era, but always really, is that they're soap operas. It's they fight and they have these crazy characters and everything like that, but they're also like just like they're just about romance and stuff. Like
yeah. This
um
they nailed the soap opera of it so well. The ensemble soap opera, which as much as I like some of the X-Men movies, and I really do like the best of them, they're not ensemble soap operas. They focus on like 3 or 4 characters per movie at best, and everybody else is just sort of there, you know. And this got to do the soap opera, you know, of a large cast, and handle it well. And they didn't over focus on Wolverine, which kind of made what happened to him at the end probably a shock for people, because it's like, oh, he's not really been a thing all season, and then he does this huge thing, and it's like, we've been holding back on him. We're going to have him have this key moment in the story, you know. But I think they all realized too, it's like Wolverine's been so overexposed. Like, let's give other people a shot.
yeah,
Um,
I was very surprised. Like I had heard early on that you know that Scott and Jean were going to be the main focus. And I was like, if only, because like I'm a
yeah,
huge I love Cyclops. He's maybe top 3 favorite. It's Storm, Cyclops, and Colossus are my 3 favorite X-Men. Colossus, obviously, complete Colossus erasure, or almost all complete Colossus erasure on this show.
I
But
hope we'll get to that, but I hope they make up for that next year.
I think they will. I'm sure they will. But the fact that Scott and Storm and Jean also, but like, were basically the main characters of the whole season is like, that's so like keeping to the promise of Claremont. Like, Claremont loved Storm so much.
Oh, he loved
And
Storm so
really
much.
treated Scott with an interesting, like, he gave Scott a lot of depth, and not always in a good light either. Like, Scott is a messy character. And I like that the season kind of steers into that. He's not just a goody two shoes. He's a mess.
He's a mess. I also like, and this is something the original series didn't really do, that's a Claremont thing. This show really leaned to Storm and Jean are sisters. They see themselves as sisters. Like, in the original series, they're friends and colleagues, but you don't get this sense that they're that close. In the comics, they are that close. And the show did it. The show kind of, it gave us that really great moment the second to last episode where, what's the quote? Which like, may they weather your mind. That little exchange between Storm and Jean. I'm like, this is so good.
Yeah.
Like, this is these two. And, and they also show Jean and Storm as being super powerful. I think the old show did it with Storm, but like Jean would do something and faint, and it was, it's become a joke that she was always fainting, and she does a little bit here, but like only after moving like entire buildings. Like it's a real exertion of her power. It's not just like I lifted a pencil, I fainted. Like it's a big deal. Like they show how powerful she is. I mean, in this last one, I mean, I think we all saw the Phoenix coming. Like I was like, they've been talking about Phoenix too much this season for them not to do something with it. Like, why bring up Phoenix all the time if you're not gonna have her Phoenix out at some point? Well, although I did think it was weird. Then it's like, oh, it's gone now. I'm like, well, yeah, because if it stuck around, it would solve all of your problems. It would solve all of your problems. I kind of like the idea that the Phoenix exists in a sense that like it's still fond of Jean, and if Jean is ever near death, it'll be like, oh no, I'm not going to let you die, girl. Like, I won't let you die, but I'm not. Oh, but then I'm out. Like, bye.
Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, there's a reason why in the upcoming Jean Grey solo comic series, Phoenix, she's in space doing spacey stuff, because if she's just on Earth, she's just going to solve every problem immediately.
Right. She's so powerful that like
basically like she's Captain Marvel. Like in the current run of Avengers comics, Captain Marvel is like kind of stuck in an alternate dimension and can only come out for like a minute at a time because she's too powerful. That's the problem with characters like that.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Although she wasn't always that powerful. I mean, that's that's a new addition. Yeah. It's sort of like been a problem. It's like they wanted to up Carol Danvers' powers, but then once they did that, it's like, well, then she can do anything. Like,
yeah,
I sort of preferred it when she was just super strong. You know what I mean? Like she could, when she had rogue level power. That's a storyline definitely that like I would like them to touch on. It's like, is Carol still in a coma in this world? Like, her and Rogue kind of need to like, I want to see a conversation there. Maybe she's with the Avenger, like those Avengers that are in space that we now know, or at least some of them are, via the ex showrunner, who's basically said like, yeah, most of the Avengers are in space dealing with Shi'ar things, Shi'ar Kree things. And then in that little cork board at the end, it says like Wanda and Pietro are off world. So I guess that kind of off world confirms.
Yeah, obviously I want to get into the finale, but let's kind of go through the season and like what were some of your favorites. We talked about the Inferno episode a lot, but like what were some of your favorite episodes? What were some of your kind of surprised that they adapted, XYZ?
Well, I mean, I was really surprised that they adapted, the story with like baby Nathan going off into the future, that all happened in the Inferno episode. Like all of this happens in this one episode. That they really kind of didn't waste time. But I expected they'd get there, but I didn't think that we would get all of it so fast. That was a surprise. What else? Adversary. Like I knew that Storm would lose her powers, but that they would do the entire like Storm versus the Adversary thing That was a surprise.
Mm.
Gosh, what else? I mean, even Bastion. Like Bastion, I don't think was a character that was on a lot of people's radar as the big bad. You know, like they definitely kept the voice actor who it was a secret. Um,
Yeah.
so because Bastion is like, you know, kind of a nothing in the comics. Like he's an idea that doesn't, that, you know, people never, no one's has ever said Bastion's my favorite X-Men villain. They might now. Like this show just did like a rehabilitation on that character and made him more interesting than the comics ever did. Um, and that was a surprise because I was like, well, I mean, I kind of thought they might touch on Operation Zero
Mm.
Tolerance because it's the 90s and it was 97 and that's when the comic came out, but that Bastion would be so well done and understandable as a villain, like especially in this last episode. You know, they really kind of like get into like, you know, everything about his backstory and how he felt. Like it's like, oh well, you felt Xavier didn't want you. Like that explains a lot, you know.
Mm.
Gosh, what else? Obviously, seeing them in their old, I didn't expect to ever see them in their 80s outfits, their 70s, 80s outfits. I mean, I would just lost it. I was like, oh my God, they're going there.
Ugh,
Uh, like, and there
it's
was no real
that
reason
is
for it. I didn't care.
no. Yeah.
There was no
That
real
is my
reason for
favorite
it.
Cyclops outfit.
Yeah.
That is my favorite Storm outfit. Or
Yep.
yeah, I actually really like her in her punk rock era,
Oh
like
yeah. We got a
depowered.
little bit of that.
I would love. We got a little bit of that. But and then you know, I've really grown to like the brown Wolverine costume.
Oh, me too.
Rather, you know, the yellow one is the OG, but like I really like the brown costume too. So that was really great to see. Yeah, like we were kind of freaking out because it's the Konami game / Pride of the X-Men
Yeah, that's the
studio.
one thing I sort of felt that they mildly dropped the ball on was it was so the Konami X-Men of them in those outfits fighting Magneto on Asteroid M. I'm like, okay, Morph, you got to turn into Colossus and Dazzler at some point. Like you got to complete the game
Mm-hmm.
characters, and they didn't do that. I'm like, how did you guys not do that? But other than that, that was super great. Yeah, there's so much good stuff in this season. I mean, I really thought that they handled the
Yeah.
Storm Forge stuff really well, like all of
Mm-hmm.
that. I mean, again, it's they speed ran through it, but like it worked, you know. Like I think the only thing I didn't care for or I got bored by quickly was Mojo World. Like I was like, all right, this is cute.
I think there's a reason that's half an episode. You know what I mean? Like, because it's not
Yeah, there's a
like
reason that's half an
we
episode.
get it. We
There,
get
there,
it. Yeah.
yeah, and and they wanted something that was goofy and light before everything the shit hit the fan, which was the next episode. The very next episode was Genosha. I mean, the Genosha episode, that
Yeah.
episode was so good. Like how they handled the destruction without being gross and blood. Like you knew that things were bad, but it wasn't like you needed to see like, you know, tons of dead bodies. Magneto describing what happened to Leech is worse than us seeing it, you know?
Yeah. Like the character who deserves it the least. Like he is such a kind of like a sad and innocent character, Leech, and the fact that he put all of his faith in Magneto and then Magneto just kind of has to like lie to him and be like it's going to be fine, and then he knows
Yeah.
in his whole heart it's not going to be fine. Um I like, and you get that, like, I honestly, like, I think one of my favorite things about the entire season is just handling the Magneto arc. Like, you know, making him kind of like a brash new leader for the X-Men, but also being like, I
Yeah.
believe Charles believes in me, so I need to believe in him kind of thing, even though he's
Yeah.
not around. And then just seeing him kind of slowly go to his old ways because it's like, I tried to do it your way, Charles, and look what they did. Like,
And look what happened.
and he completely, you know, he goes off the deep end and all this stuff. And then this last episode was so nice, like all the Charles and Magneto stuff inside Magneto's head
Was
while like he's basically trying
yes.
to convince him. It was so nice. And you hypothesized, and I agreed with you, that they were going to do Onslaught, and it
I think
doesn't
they
seem like
still
that's what
are.
they're doing.
You don't think so? I think that he was in his head enough that I don't think it's going to
It's
immediately like
possible.
come forth, but there's just too many
Oh,
things.
maybe
It's like,
that's true.
oh, like there, he was in his head long enough that there's going to be something that probably won't do it until like the end of next season, but like weird
Okay.
shit's going to
Yeah.
happen. And Bo DeMeo said he's like, I like Onslaught. I'm like, well, clearly, because like I don't think he'll be the main thing, but they're going to bring that up. he was just in there too long. Like
Yeah.
there was too much, and I think they made like a comment too about if we both die, like, or something, like I'll take him down with me, like with like this isn't something I'm supposed to be doing. Like there's just too many little things, um but I don't think it'll be right away. Well, I mean, also
Yeah.
they're not in our time anymore.
Yeah. They're in 3000
Um,
BC Egypt and everything like
yeah,
that.
I mean, the
Um,
response to
but yeah,
Magneto has been very interesting. Certainly, like among the fandom, because there was a lot of Magneto was right type stuff, and I'm like, well, I get it, but he did just kill presumably thousands of people, including probably children on planes and in hospitals. Like it is hard
yeah,
to justify. Like I get why he did it. I understand the reasoning. That's why he's a great character. We understand why he does these terrible things. I don't know if I can justify that. And also, and they did bring it up in the episode. Charles is like, "What about all those mutants that are still down there? Like, they're gonna die too." And it's like, oh, and Magneto's like, we evolve in the dark. I'm like, well, some of them will, but some of them will die. you know,
yeah,
it's that kind of binary thinking that he has that the show captured really well, but um, it's also made it hard for me to be like very completely Magneto was right on the way some people have been. Like I'm like, you know, but they did
yeah.
such a good
It's
job with him.
my my favorite version of Magneto is that kind of like I sometimes anti-hero, sometimes anti-villain, but he's never fully one or the other. And
Yeah,
um I think that's kind of like where my favorite Magneto is that like he will still do bad stuff if he thinks it's for the right reason. He's a definite, and
yeah,
honestly, like that's kind of what Apocalypse is like nowadays too. Um he's just, and so it'll be interesting next season to see, the birth of Apocalypse, the rise of Apocalypse. But because they kind of, Wolverine mentioned him in a joke, Apocalypse, in the second episode when Jean's giving birth. He's like, she's like, he's coming, and he's like, who, Apocalypse? And it's like, actually, yes,
yeah,
that is correct. He is coming.
yeah.
We
We
just
knew they'd
didn't
have to
realize
get
it.
to him. Yeah. We knew they'd have to get
Yeah,
to him. I think next season you're going to get, because Apocalypse on the old show was pretty one note, and they didn't really,
very much.
and to be honest, at the comics at the time, he was too. I think he's only become more rounded as a character in like the modern era. And I think they'll probably bring some of that
Mhm.
to him. But like, we're going to get flashbacks to his origins, or not even flashbacks because it's the present for the X-Men, but he's in the future. Like we're gonna get him in like 3 timelines. It's gonna be very Star Trek: The Next Generation season series finale, where we're gonna be like in 3 different time periods. I think with this character, like beginning, middle, and end. Which should be really interesting.
And that's what kind of makes me think that, because we see who's in the past. It's Charles, Rogue, Magneto, Nightcrawler. I think that's it.
I think
Um,
that's it.
and uh, Beast, or is Beast?
Beast.
Yeah,
Beast is there.
Beast. Yeah. So they're in the past with Young and Sabanur, and then Jean and Scott are in the far future with
Yeah.
Ascani and
Yeah.
young Nathan. But
Which
we
I
don't know
just
what happened
lost
to
my mind.
Wolverine, Storm. I know, amazing. When she said, "I am
And
Ascani," it's like
also, I don't know
amazing.
if you noticed. Do you know who voiced her? I had to watch twice. I'm like, I know
I
that
didn't.
voice. It's Gates
Who
McFadden.
is
It's
it?
Dr. Crusher. It's Dr. Crusher. It's Gates
Oh,
McFadden.
that's so
And I was
awesome. I
like,
didn't
oh
notice
my
that.
god. I was like, how do I know that voice? And then I looked in the credits. So yeah, we've got her. So excited.
Um,
But yeah, we don't
but
know
we don't
where
know where.
Wolverine.
Yeah. So Wolverine, Storm, Morph are presumed dead on Forge's corkboard, and also Jubilee and Roberto are AWOL along with Cable.
Yeah.
And I could see all of them kind of popping up to deal with present day Apocalypse, since we know he's there and
Yes.
he's turning Gambit into death.
That's another comics thing, well, that they'll probably loosely adapt, which
Yeah.
was after the X-Men presumably died. And it's clear in this finale, the world thinks they're like, it's been 6 months and the world thinks the X-Men are dead. That we're going to get Forge created like his own team. Like he went on this search for the missing X-Men and kind of created his own team on Muir Island. That was a whole thing. I think we're going to get a version of that. Um, I mean, they clearly seem to know that Roberto and Jubilee are alive, but
Hmm.
they've they've gone AWOL. So he's going to have to find them. I don't know. I have a feeling Storm and Wolverine are in the present. I don't think that they got time traveled. They're just lying
No,
low
I
doing
don't think
something,
so
because I
either.
think they would have shown us if they were in some other time. They would have been like, oh, here they are. The fact that they didn't means that they're somewhere in the present, maybe lying low. My fingers are crossed that they're in Australia, because I would love that.
I feel like that's probably what they're going to do, and then there's going to be. I mean, X Factor already exists, and we saw Havoc on the corkboard too, and we know that Strong
Mhm.
Guy's there. We've seen, um, who else from X Factor have we seen? Well, Polaris, I guess we saw in the future
Polaris.
in like a little future look.
She was in the old show
But
too.
various other X Factor people. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
Madrox was on
Um,
Genosha.
right.
I'm trying to think
And
who
then I think
else.
we also saw Feral at one point too, but
Yeah.
um, or I know is Feral Wolfsbane? Are they the same character,
No, they're not the same
or are they two
character.
different characters?
Wolfsbane is a separate. Yeah, they're two
Okay.
different ones.
That's what I
Feral
thought. I
is
was like, but they look the same.
they look the same. They were Feral was like a Rob Liefeld creation that was created for X Force. It's sort of weird that she's like in a lot of iconography and products and stuff from like that era, that like early 90s, like, but they never really did much with her. Like she wasn't, whereas
Mm,
Wolfsbane had
okay.
like years of character development because she was a New Mutant forever prior to all that. Pharaoh was kind of newly created, and she just pops up a lot in the background. Um, yeah,
I mean, Liefeld has a lot to answer for, but like, how can he get away with just? I mean, because Deadpool is just Deathstroke. Like everyone knows it. They
yeah. He
made
wanted to
Deadpool
make
more
Deathstroke.
interesting because they,
Yeah,
yeah. So, but design wise, it's just the same, and it's like, how do you get away with making Feral in a world where Wolfsbane already exists? Like, it's really very silly.
yeah, yeah.
Design
It
wise,
was
I mean.
weird. Design wise, yeah, I know, I get it. One's a cat and one's a wolf, but they looked pretty identical, and it was weird because they were in on X-Men teams at the same time, like in that very same era. So, um, yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I think Storm, Wolverine, Morph are somewhere in the present. I think that the fact that they didn't show them in either
Mm-hmm.
of the other time periods means that they're lying low. I'm going to be very, very curious to see what they do with that. And of course, all those characters on that. Like, I lost my mind when I saw that corkboard. I'm like, oh my god, finally! Like, it's the first confirmation Shadowcat exists in this universe. They have never, she's just a little face on the board. But I'm like, oh, okay, good. Like, Dust is another one. That's another like new X-Men. That's like a modern era X-Men characters, which I get that they have
Mm-hmm.
to, they've got to go into that well, because if you really go into like whatever 70s, 80s, 90s X-Men, it really is largely like white people. Like they kind of have to
Yeah.
diversify, and there's been much more diversity among the X-Men in the 21st century. Um, so they kind of, and she has cool powers, so it's like, okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense that they would use her. But largely that was characters that we've been waiting for. Archangel, presumed dead Archangel, and of course that whole board, the way that everything was laid out was the cover of Days of Future Past, the comic, which has like
Yeah.
all the faces of the mutants with the like, dead, missing, all of that, like that iconic cover. It's a complete reference to that, which I enjoyed. Um, so
Yeah. It's a really great shorthand for, you know, this is how bad it's gotten. All these mutants are dead or whatever. And
yeah,
I love that Forge has basically been alone for 6 months trying to figure out what's going on.
yeah,
Um, and Bishop shows up at the end. I was wondering if Bishop was going to come back because he leaves with baby Nathan at the end of
yeah.
episode 3, and then it's like, I guess Bishop's never coming back, but then he comes back
I
again. So
knew that they would have to do something with him, because otherwise he's just there to take the baby into the future. I mean, I feel like that's something they have to deal with. I'm like, don't you feel guilty? Like, you lost a baby. You lost a
yeah,
baby in time. Um, yeah. So I knew that they would probably have to do something with him. Um, so I was glad that he showed up again at the end. So,
It was really cool to see. I mean, because obviously, like, we're big Claremont heads. It's hard to be an X-Men fan and not like Claremont, because he gave
yeah.
so much to the story and everything like that, and the characters. But and I think this is good ultimately. But the fact that so much of the direct adaptations and everything like that was post Claremont, like it was,
Mhm.
the cartoon started with the Jim Lee era, but was
Yeah.
so much influenced by Claremont, because that's basically
Yeah,
all that
because
had
he
been
had
there up
just
to that point. There'd
left.
been some, yeah,
He had just left the comic after 16 years when the cartoon premiered. So everything that they were drawing from was Claremont stuff. Everything, pretty
yeah,
much. Maybe Days of Future Past, not Days of Future Past, when they did the Age of Apocalypse, that was a post Claremont thing that they adapted. But largely, they were just adapting Claremont stuff. And he
hmm
got credited for it too. Like it always said like based on Chris Claremont. Um,
hmm
but there was a lot of
So
things
when I
that
was
they
doing my
left
little,
out, and I
hmm
like that this show finally was like things I never thought. Like when they announced X-Men 97, I was like, okay, they're probably going to do some stories from the comics that they didn't get around to. But like, I never thought they'd do Madeline Pryor because she's too complicated. Like that story is so complicated that I'm like, they're just going to skip it. And they didn't. And that they streamlined it and made it cool, like made me so happy. And so many of these stories that I never thought that they would adapt because of their complexity, like they were just like, no, we're going to do it. We're just going to, we'll speed run through it, but we're going to do all these major highlights from X-Men lore. Um, which was great because I really never thought we'd see some of those characters. I
yeah,
know that the original show hinted that Cable and Jean and Scott were, they dropped the hint. Like Cable said something like, "I know all about Cyclops and Jean Grey," like suggesting he knows they're his parents. But I just thought they were going to make Jean his mom. Like they were just going to like make it easier to digest and like, oh, Jean will just be his mom. It's like, nope, they went for the full comic soap opera of it, and I adore it. You know, and judging
and
by the
also that we
reaction, it's
don't. And
you know,
I was going to say,
oh,
that we don't know, and Jean doesn't know when she was Jean and when she was Madeline. Like she has
yeah,
no idea, and that's
yeah,
such an integral and interesting part of her kind of life. Once she comes back, it's like, I don't know when I was
yeah,
replaced. I don't know when I was cloned. Like I think that's really fascinating. I was doing my little research for the video that will come out next week, as you're listening to this, if you get it when it's new. But Cable premiered Cable first appearance on the cartoon was in episode 7 of the first season. He has a little cameo, um, which debuted or aired 6 or 7 months before the comics confirmed that he was Nathan.
yeah, yeah.
So
It was
like
a
it's
mystery as
funny
to
that,
who he was.
yeah,
Yeah, that was a
and I love that.
mystery
And the
for
cartoon
years.
never really, and
No,
that's
they
like the
just hint
first
at
thing
it.
that they do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cartoon just hinted at it, like that he just knew something about them. As like he was doing research on the X-Men of this time, and he's like, "Yeah, I know. Skip the profile on Scott and Jean. I know all about them." And it's of course the comic fans are like, "Oh, well, we know what that means," but they just never really
Yeah.
dealt with it. Um, is there anything that like surprised you that they didn't do?
Good question. I kind of was expecting. Oh goodness. Well, I did expect that Executioner would be more of an interesting character. Like he's basically just a costume in this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and not that he's a very interesting character anyway, but like the fact that like, hey, we designed this character, and also he was an action figure. You know what I
hmm
mean? But
yeah,
it's like, um, he's in that. He kind of goes out like a chump, but he has more to do in the comics. Um, I was sort of expecting. Um, I was sort of expecting Mr. Sinister to be more than just kind of a lackey for Bastion, and
yes,
it was a good fake out, because everyone was like, Mr. Sinister's the bad guy of the season, and he is, but it's absolutely, he's kind of just like the lapdog for Bastion for a good portion of the
yeah,
season. We find out. Um, yeah, I don't know actually. Like I was surprised that I guess in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense, but like it felt like Wolverine was not in it much. It felt like Gambit certainly, other than his like big ending, didn't really have much to do. Although we know now that he's going to be Death, so like it all kind of fits if you know that there's a plan in place, and not
yes,
just
yeah,
that this is a one-off kind of thing. Um, I do think that like I think my one kind of misgiving about the season, and it all ended up making making sense and everything, is that when they split up into teams in the last episode, and half of them went to Asteroid M and half of them went to go fight Bastion, they
Why would
went
you
in
send
completely
Wolverine?
like logically. Why would you send Wolverine to? Why wouldn't
No.
you send? Why would you put Jean and Cable anywhere near Mr. Sinister? It makes no sense.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
and it
none.
like all that stuff, and it's like, no, you send your strongest X-Men to go fight the Sentinels, and you send your smartest X-Men to go fight Magneto, but they didn't do
Yeah.
that.
No, that was a bad choice, Scott. Um,
Yeah.
there were some things that I thought they were gonna do that they didn't, and of course they may do them later. Shocked that we did not get one hint of Mystique. I mean, the
Not
assumption
one.
everyone
Absolutely.
had,
Yeah.
not one. And the assumption everybody had was that it was Val Cooper, because in the comics at one point she impersonated Val Cooper. Then that wasn't the case. She's like nowhere to be found, and that's a major character that is sort of shocking that she wasn't there. I really did expect, they kept showing the portrait of the original 5 X-Men over and over in the show. The original animated series didn't. There was a couple of moments where they showed flashbacks, like not even like with dialogue to like the early years, but they never really like kind of hung a lantern on the fact that there was an original class as much as this show did. So I expected I expected Bobby and Warren to show up at some point, because
Mhm.
they kind of kept like reminding the audience that like, yes, this was the original class, this is who was here at the beginning. And then they didn't do anything with that. So those things kind of surprised me. Also, just because it would have been a fun visual nod, I'm surprised Cable didn't turn into Strife for when he turned bad, in the way that Madeline became the
Yeah.
Goblin Queen. I'm like, oh, you're gonna have him put on the Strife armor, and because Strife is such a complicated character, and probably they're never gonna get to him, so I'm just like, oh, they'll just do a little nod to Strife. They didn't do that, but that's kind of where my big like, oh, okay, that's
Mhm.
weird that you chose not to do that, but
I loved, especially in this last episode, but I loved all of the um cameos of different Marvel, like
oh my gosh.
Marvel Universe characters. So like we had Spider-Man in that one episode, we had Thunderbolt
Mhm.
Ross, we had, Captain America, we had all these kind of, but this last episode you had Captain America and Iron Man in with
Yeah.
the president. You had T'Chaka, which I thought was a really cool thing. It's not T'Challa, it's T'Chaka. It's like, that's rad.
Mhm.
Um uh we see a half second of Doctor Strange doing like psychic surgery, which is very funny.
Yes.
Um
Daredevil.
um Daredevil and Cloak and Dagger. That was like
Cloak and
like
Dagger, who at the time were mutants. Like, I think they've been retconned as not being mutants anymore, but like
I
they
think
were
that's
mutants
right.
back in
Yeah.
the day. They were mutants back in the day, so it would make sense that they'd be there. They were like a thing. Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed, but Peter Parker and MJ are
I
also
did.
there.
I did.
And Bo DeMeo, the former showrunner, went online. He's like, "Yes, that's our confirmation. He did find MJ in the multiverse, and she's fine now." Like, they're, for
I
people
love
who
it.
need
I
closure
love
for
it. Yeah.
Spider-Man the series, like, yes, they're fine. It's all good. In case we never get anything again, like, there's our confirmation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I loved that. Oh, who else? I know I'm missing other people.
that's most of them. Well, Alpha Flight.
I think
Alpha Flight shows
Alpha
up
Flight. That's right.
with Psylocke, who's there for
Psylocke.
some reason. I don't know. She's with them. Psylocke. I did like that Iron Man is in his 90s armor from his own cartoon. Um, that's his 90s armor that he also used on Spider-Man,
Yep.
which I thought was a
That
nice
is his
touch.
canonical 90s armor.
Yeah, like they didn't do anything to make him look more like MCU's Tony. I like that. Gosh, well, Morph turns into Reed, which is Art Reed Richards. That's our first Mr.
Oh, that was
Fantastic.
rad. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay, good,
Yeah.
good. They're acknowledging the Fantastic Four.
And Hulk too in the last episode.
Hulk, yes. So a lot of major, when they're in Magneto's mind, we get the scene where he sees the boat and it's like Rogue, but we also see Wanda and Pietro on there, and Polaris. Thus confirming
Mm,
she is his daughter in this, universe. I mean, it's kind of weird. They're like very in the background, and it's like, well, you're more concerned about Rogue than you are about your kids. But that's very, you know, um, that's very Magneto. Um,
It is very Magneto. Yeah. Um, yeah, I just loved all that stuff because it's like they did that so fleetingly in X-Men the animated series. Like obviously they did so much of it in Spider-Man the animated series. Like the X-Men themselves showed up in Spider-Man the animated series and all the other characters did too. But like other than Cap, who had an actual like storyline in the 5th season, um all the times we see, you know, any other Marvel character in X-Men the animated series is like half a second. Like you see
yeah,
Spider-Man's hand and a shadow, and you see like War Machine fly in and pick a person up, and you see Doctor Strange kind of like turn
yeah,
around. That's kind of like it.
yeah. Doctor Strange shows
Thor,
up
you see
twice to
just
turn
like
around and be
standing.
like, huh? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Which I love, but it's like it's the confirmation that they are in the greater Marvel universe, and I think that that's something that like, you know, it's I think is important, but it's also like we need to contend with the I think the big problem that possibly Feige will run into is that like in a world where there are all these other superheroes that people like, why are they upset that mutants exist? And I
I
think
have
it's
an
just
answer for that.
because of, please go for it. Go.
And I've always used this weird analogy because a lot of people have been saying it's like, why, if there are humans with powers, do people hate mutants? And bigotry isn't logical, really. And it makes me think of
I mean,
me,
that's
a
true.
gay kid me as a gay kid growing up in the 80s, that you couldn't, anything that was femme, anything that was like not hyper masculine was mocked, got you made fun of. But for whatever reason, hair metal guys got to wear makeup and tease out their hair and wear nails and do all of this because they were constantly professing their heterosexuality. So as long as you knew that they were really straight, it was okay that they adopted these gay things, these queer things, as long as everybody knew. So I think as long as the public knows that, oh, those Avengers are humans who, you know, they just have powers, but they weren't born that way, that they're not whatever, they're okay with it. It doesn't make sense, but it doesn't make sense in reality either. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not
Yeah,
something
that's
that
true.
really, like, it's just bigotry. Like bigotry, it's okay if they're one of us. You know, the only thing that's never
Mm.
made sense to me in Marvel comics in this way is nobody knows who Spider-Man really is, so why don't they assume he's a mutant? He's a hated character. Like, you know, the press hates Spider-Man, and they're always like, "Oh, that
Mhm.
the wall crawling menace." I'm like, I would assume that he's a mutant. Like, why don't you call him a mutant? Because you don't know that. Like, how do you know that he was a 15-year-old who, you know, had a lab accident? You know, the assumption should be. Whereas the Fantastic Four, most of the Avengers have public identities. Like, everybody knows the Fantastic Four were
Right.
these scientists that, like, everybody knows how that happened. People know how Hulk happened. You know, people know Thor is a god. You know, it's sort of it's you know, Iron Man's a guy in a suit. So most of the major characters are kind of accounted for in that way, but people shouldn't know that Spider-Man's not a mutant. You know, I don't think they've ever properly explained that in the cartoons or the comics. That how does the public
Mm-mm.
know he's human? But you know, that's the one thing. But yeah, I do believe that like the regular population would be that way because they are that way. Like, like I've seen them be that way about other things, you know, and it's the same illogic. Like it's not really based on logic. You know, it's based on like feeling and emotion and, you know, emotions of inferiority or whatever. So that's my take on that.
Yeah. I think that's pretty reasonable. And it also kind of speaks to like these humans made themselves better versus like they were just born that way. They don't deserve it. Like
Yeah.
there's that aspect
They
of it too. And
yes.
like we don't know what they can do that's scary. Whereas like we know effectively the Hulk is dangerous, but we know that that's what he does. You know,
Right.
it's sort of like it's the, you know, it's the hiding in plain sight thing. It's the, you know, and you're right, like bigotry doesn't make any sense. I think it's funny you bring up the 80s hair metal thing because there's also 80s action movies where it's all just these glistening like
Mm-hmm.
shirtless dudes,
Yeah.
and like every guy was like, yeah, that's a real man. It's like that is not like not that there's not a
Yeah.
real man, but you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
he's not macho.
I mean, I think back then that
Like
was less coded, as I don't think the general public kind of knew that that was something that was gay coded. People are much more savvy about that now.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
definitely things like makeup and, big hair and all of that. And basically, like, all these hair metal guys were in drag, and they've admitted it. Like, you talk to like these people, like, yeah, we were in drag. But as long as people knew, because all of their songs were about women and everything about their personas was about pursuing women, that it was okay. Like, it was okay if they did it. But,
Mhm.
I mean, it's kind of similar to now too. It's like, all these people in these drag bands and they're obsessed with stuff. I'm like, you didn't care when it was Mrs. Doubtfire. You didn't care when it was Bosom Buddies. When straight guys do it, it's fine, But when it's gay people doing their own thing, then it somehow it sends them, and
Mhm.
it's similar. That's how I look at it, because it didn't used to make sense to me either on a logical standpoint when I was a kid. I'm like, I don't get why they don't hate the Fantastic Four. I don't get why they don't, But like, just going through life, I've been like, oh well, because it is illogical. It's based on fear and hatred and jealousy, kind of, you know. Um,
Yeah. And I think in a world where where the Sokovia in the fictional world where the Sokovia Accords happened, like I can kind of buy that, like you'd have a character like a Thunderbolt Ross or somebody, or Senator Kelly early on being like, there's too many of them, how are we gonna, keep ourselves safe against them and everything like that. I get it. I do kind of get it, but when I was a kid, I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. This is silly.
sure, as a kid, I kind of thought that too. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, I think there's something that neither the comics or the cartoons have ever really dealt with. It's such a discrimination metaphor that they sort of miss. Like, there would be a real concern, even if you're not a bigot, about, say, well, I live next door to this person who, maybe they sneeze and set something on fire. Like, that's a safety concern in some of these cases. Do you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
and I think that there would be people who would not be bigoted, who would be like, I don't know how I feel about the person who can, you know, call down lightning living next to me. You know what I mean? It wouldn't necessarily
Yeah.
be that. Like, I think there's a nuance there that they sort of, neither the cartoons or the comics have ever been able to really tackle. It's sort of where the metaphor falls apart a little bit, because people of different races and sexual orientations can't do these. Like, that's not a real concern. We're just people at the end of the day. They're more than people. You know, um, so yeah, but it's hard to deal with in that context. Like, so
Yeah. And you'd think people would be more scared of Thor since he is a god from another planet. You know
right.
what I mean? Like, or
You would
something
think
like
more
that.
people.
But
Yeah, because he's a freaking god. Like, he looks like a god. He does these, godlike things. You know, it is weird. I wonder if they'll deal with it at all. I mean, I do also wonder how much we'll see of the Avengers, really. And I think the show's popular enough that they'll probably be like, okay, do whatever you want. Although they were not allowed to use Deadpool this season, but that's fine. And we see enough of him. But
I think he has like a 3 or 4 second cameo in the original
mhm.
series as like either a flashback or like a mental projection. And I think that's it. Like he's
Yeah,
not a character in the
no, he's not a
cartoon.
character.
So
But given his popularity, I kind of thought that, like, they'd want to bring him in, but they also,
I did too. I actually thought about, I
I'm
thought
like,
they
how
would.
are they not? I bet you they will at some point. Like, I think that they were just like, they didn't know how big the show was going to be, and I think they were like, maybe
Hmm.
let's not do as much Marvel Universe stuff as we can, you know. Um, but man, that would be really great if they really did. I mean, I don't necessarily want Avengers versus X-Men. I mean, there's been a
No.
few Avengers versus X-Men stories. It's not just the 2012 event. There's been a few different times but for them to do something with that. But then again, we have to get our X-Men back. Like, they're all kind of, you know, I foresee a season where they're
Mhm.
basically like scattered throughout most of, through time, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But it's funny. I mean, like, with Mother Ascani being there, and also in that kind of like future projection, that's confirmed that Rachel exists and also Cable. And it's like, okay, great, cool. And it's like, how
yeah,
long until we get Hope Summers? You know what I mean? Like, how far into this show are we going to get? Is it
yeah,
going to be X-Men? I mean, I'm assuming next year will be or next season will be X-Men 98, but, um, are we going to get X-Men 2002, or, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Like, I have no idea. I mean, I'm
I would love
interested to
to
see
that
like how
every
far they're going to
season.
get.
yeah, it'll be interesting. It's like, is every season going to be like another skip year? You know what I mean? Like in 80, 98, 99, like it would be really cool. But is that then another series? Like, I wonder how they'll treat it. Um,
Yeah, it's a good point.
like, I mean, it'll be a retitled show. Yeah, I don't know how far they're going to get into the 2000s stuff. I mean, Genosha's a 2000s thing. Messiah, like you're talking
Mhm.
about Hope, that's Messiah Complex. I think for them to do that, the mutant race would have to be, they'd have to do something like Decimation. Like they'd have to be
Yeah,
almost
that's true.
extinct.
Uh,
They'd have to be almost extinct. And Genosha was not like, it was a massacre, but it wasn't like mutants didn't stop being born. I mean, as far as we know,
right.
unless they did something like that for them to bring in Hope and all of that. Like that's such a complicated story. But they did Madeline, who's super
It
complicated.
is.
So, you know, like they could just
Yeah.
they could rejigger what Hope is, you know, what that whole storyline even means. Because that's a really popular story. That's one of the more popular modern X-Men stories is Messiah Complex.
Yeah. It's
I mean, I do think we'll
and
get
there's a
to
huge
Krakoa
like it's
eventually.
I hope so. I bet we will. I'm sure we will.
Yeah, I think that's a
Unless they want to save that for
third.
the movies, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of have I've heard scuttlebutt that like part of the reason Krakoa ended is because the movies don't want to do it. The movies kind of want to more back to basics, and they always want to reflect, you know, which I mean makes sense. Like, I mean, I don't know if you hop right into Krakoa, but the cartoons can do it. The cartoons can do it easily, and like
Yeah, the
they might
cartoons
have set
can. That's
something
true.
up. Like they might be setting something up with Charles and Magneto, you know, because I really kind of didn't see the Charles Magneto story going that way. Like, I mean, I don't know where they're going to be with each, you know, in terms of each other. I think it'll be a little bit like the second season
Mhm.
of the old show where they were like kind of on their own little thing, you know, for a while.
Mhm.
So, I mean, those flashbacks were really great. Like, I loved all those flashbacks, like stuff between them because it's not
They were
something we
really
really
great.
ever saw. We never really saw. I mean, the writing on the show is just really, really good for a. I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but like, you know, for a superhero cartoon. Like that's not R-rated. That's not trying to be more than it is.
Mhm.
Like it's just the writing is just really solid on the show. And they did a really good job with Charles and Magneto there. I was surprised to see Charles come back actually, but the end of the season. I did not think that was going to happen. I thought we were going to I thought Charles would come back as a tease at the very very end. Like that's it. Like the fact that he's in the last 3 episodes or almost 4 that they went to that so fast. I thought we'd get Magneto as the leader
Yeah.
of the X-Men for longer. Um, but you know, now that he is back, yeah, and how are they going to explain to the world? Like the world knows that he didn't die, or you know that like they were lied to, and that's not something they didn't deal with it that much. Bastion kind of revealed to the world that like, oh, he's with these aliens, and you know the X-Men lied to you. Like, is that going to factor into the next season? Like, are they going to ever bring that up again? You know, who knows?
Is it gonna X Factor in?
I mean, I want X Factor so bad. I want the original X Factor so bad on this because that's another thing too. I really thought Scott was going to break off. I thought Scott was going to be like,
Oh, yeah.
I'm neither Magneto nor am I Charles Xavier's mentality anymore. I think he was going to go in his own direction, and clearly they're doing the Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix instead, which I did not see coming. Like, did not see
No.
them
But
going
there
into the
again, they're
far
doing a
future.
lot of Scott Lobdell stuff, like a lot. Which,
A
you know,
lot,
he's effectively took over after Claremont left him and Fabian Nicieza. But
yeah,
they're not doing very much Nicieza stuff. It's a lot of Lobdell stuff.
yeah.
Um, like every time I go to look up who wrote that, oh, Scott Lobdell. You know, it's like it's just
Scott
constantly
Lobdell,
like
who
he's the
should,
one who came up
yeah,
with.
yeah, like they're doing a lot of that 90s stuff. So I don't, yeah, yeah. Some of it's Fabian Nicieza because I think Fabian Nicieza did Fatal Attractions. So Wolverine getting the adamantium sucked out, is that not him?
I don't remember. I don't think so. Hang on
Yeah,
one second. Yeah, you might be right.
like there's some, but it's definitely leaning heavily on Scott Lobdell. I mean, those two basically what they
It's
did.
both of them. It's both
It's
of them.
both of them. They were very like, and some of them have admitted it. Like their job was to mimic Claremont as much as possible. Like they did not
Yeah.
want to rattle the apple cart and have that didn't happen until Morrison, who came in and like, you know, you've spent 10 years of basically asking these writers to mimic Claremont, and I don't want to do that. Like, I want to do something else, which, you know, he did. I think Emma Frost is doing, I
Very
mean, the
much.
fact that they showed Emma Frost, the fact that she survived, I think we're going to get her as you know, they need a telepath anyway.
And we saw her for half a second in the opening credits. Like,
Yeah.
it's when Charles looking in on the Hellfire Club and Emma shuts a door, and it's like, ooh, that's interesting. Like,
Yeah. Why are you
because
showing that?
the other new addition from this episode was Charles and Eric from, you know, the past, and we got that like right away in the
Yeah.
flashback stuff. So I was very interested to be like, oh, why this random Emma Frost moment? Like, that's cool. But
They're setting her up for, yeah, the fact that she lived, yeah, they're setting her up for,
and she got her diamond powers.
and she got her diamond powers. All of that is straight early 2000s. You know, he doesn't, the X-Men 97 doesn't draw too much from that era, but like those couple key things are is stuff they're going to play with for sure. I mean, I just want to see Emma and Kitty, because I love that dynamic between them, because they hate each other, but they sort of respect each other. And if we get a team with those two on it, oh my God.
I mean, we're getting that in the comics, so maybe that is what they're going to do.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I also think we might
had that in the comic before.
Yeah, I think we might see a version of the Australian Outback team, because
I think so.
Like, I think Storm and Wolverine, like, it just feels like maybe that's where they are, and they're going to kind of start a team, and, you know, do the whole like, well, the world thinks we're dead, and we can accomplish more if the world thinks we're dead. That was Storm's idea, by the way, which was not in the comics, which, you know, later she sort of regretted. I always had issues with that as a kid. Like, I'm like, at least call your friend, like, call Kitty and Peter, or Kitty and Nightcrawler. Like, you can do your whole, like, the world things. Like, I think you can trust them to, you know, you don't have to put them through the grieving process. Storm. Like, why did you do that? Yeah, there's a lot of, you know, and this show has never, the old show never revealed that Havoc and Cyclops are brothers. We know it, but they don't know it. Like, that's a major thing that they have to still like address, which is like, Alex doesn't, like, their powers didn't work on each other. And they're like, that's weird. And, you know, the audience is like, oh, it's because they're brothers. But like, then they never followed up on it. You know, they just forgot.
Yeah, because they're not.
And
yeah, X Factor never returns after that.
No, they have one. I think we see them in like the background somewhere. But like that X Factor, and I don't even know if they're together anymore. Like, it's not clear, that because Forge doesn't seem to be leading them. You know, Forge clearly is either on a break from X Factor, or they disbanded. So we don't know, because Strong Guy and Madrox are on Genosha, so we don't really know. Yeah, they can do a lot of. I'm very curious to see what they're going to do for next season, and I really hope we don't. I have a feeling we have to wait a long time. Like, you know, which is not a favorite thing of mine in the modern streaming era of TV shows. Like, I cannot tell you how much I miss like the old days of like Star Trek. It ends in May and starts in September, and you knew that you were just going to have 4 months to wait, you know, between your shows. And now it's like, we're lucky if this appears in a year. Like, I would be shocked if it shows up a year from now.
Me too. Yeah, you know, fewer episodes, and, I mean, and less frequently.
And then, you know, we don't know what it's going to be like, because, you know, obviously there's behind the scenes turmoil on that show. And, you know, we don't know the details of it, but like, will this show be as good without their showrunner? Regardless of what they may or not have done, like, they clearly were a powerful, you know, voice on this show, and can take a lot of credit for a lot of things. And I know that he wrote most of the second season. Like, he said he's written it, but, you know, that a lot of stuff from season 1 was created on the spot, like, you know, while they were recording and stuff like that. And he's like, I won't be able to do that this time, because they haven't started any of that. So don't know how that's going to fare without their showrunner, who clearly was such a big fan. Not saying other people can't do it. Like, I'm not saying that, like, again, I'm not on one of these people. There's a huge thing online of like, you need to rehire him. And I'm like, I don't know what he did. I'm not going to say that until I know. You know, like, I'm not going to get on that bandwagon until, do you know what I'm saying? I also don't want to be weird about it after the fact, because like, I don't, that's just a modern thing that I don't particularly love, which is like, for example, like when we talk about Buffy, it's like the creator of, but like, I'm like I know he's shitty, but like, we can say his name. And I hope that it's the same with whatever happens. Like, he may no longer be there, but like, I don't want to pretend that Beau DeMaio didn't have anything to do with the show, because clearly they did. You
Yeah.
know, like
It's
it's. I don't need to Voldemort people. You can just be like, okay, you don't get this job anymore, but like, I don't have to pretend that you didn't have anything to do with why the show was good.
yeah, yeah. Just erasing the name, I think
It's
is very
weird.
short-sighted. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
subscribe to that. Like, you know, like, it's like, you can't pretend that person didn't have anything to do with it. Like, you can advocate for them not returning to that job, but you then can't be like,
Yeah,
it's
of
the
course.
Voldemort like
Yeah.
but that's a thing people do now. Like, it's like the creator who will
Yeah.
not be named, and I'm like, okay, like, we're all grown-ups, we don't have to do this. But it will be interesting to see how they fare without that voice, and I hope that whoever they find is as
Mhm.
big a fan, because I think that's what clearly is. Like, he's a huge fan. Like, find someone who is both talented and knows this material inside and out in this way, because they clearly do.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah. That's the biggest question mark, I think, going forward, is that, like, and obviously, yeah, I completely agree. Like, if Beau DeMaio did bad stuff, and it seems very
yeah,
likely that is the case, at the very least, to be fired from the show that is a huge hit.
yeah,
Don't hire him back and whatever. But the question is, what I hope this isn't the case, that he is the magic, the special sauce, and
the
that they can
special
find
sauce.
somebody
Yeah,
else.
yeah. I hope that they get somebody who is
Because it,
as versed.
yeah,
Because that's the thing. This is the
because the
most. It
aforementioned.
is. Yeah. Mhm.
Go ahead.
Um, I was gonna say that they just need somebody who knows as much. Somebody who is as
Yeah,
much of an X-Men fan, because I do think it's the best non-comics X-Men adaptation that we've ever had. Like, even the best of the movies don't match this. So the old cartoon doesn't match it. Like, this is the best version of all of these things.
yeah.
Um,
It
so
it's it has the benefit of being a show ostensibly made by fans who grew up reading and watching the same stuff that we did, or that
yes,
the people who are writing X-Men comics now did. Like, there's 40 plus years um of that kind of love for those books and everything like that, and
yeah,
incorporating stuff that came post the cartoon into the cartoon is a really
so
is
cool.
testament to that. It's not just, oh, let's do the same stuff they did on the old cartoon because we don't care. Like, it's very clearly made for and by people who are huge fans of these characters in this world and everything like that.
Yeah,
And I think you're like, old cartoon didn't have that kind of thing. It was just, we're making a cartoon. Like,
mhm.
they did a great job for what they did, absolutely, but they didn't have that kind of, like, growing up with that stuff that we do now. And I think
No,
the movies suffered from being, they needed to make money. They needed to be kind of like all encompassing blockbusters. And it wasn't until, you know, we got a movie like Logan specifically because everybody liked Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and he'd been and they'd been around a long time. I think
yeah,
Deadpool and Wolverine is the same, or Deadpool and Wolverine is going to be the same thing, where it's like, this is a movie for people who know that universe or these characters and all this stuff,
yeah,
because it's been around for 20 years on film at this point, 25 years almost.
yeah.
So
It's interesting too that this show did really well, and I just thought of it. They It was 90s, clearly said in 1997, that it never felt like a come as the 90s party. Like, they never overdid the
no,
the 90s of it. There were sort of like mentions, like, okay, chat rooms instead of, like, things that would have existed then versus now, but they didn't overdo pop culture references. They didn't overdo any of that stuff, which I liked, because they could have been, like, part of me thought that's what the show was going to be, which was going to be
yeah,
like, here's them listening to, like, Biggie or what, you know what I mean? Like, here's whatever, like, which can be fun, but it would have gotten annoying. The
yeah,
closest we had was Ace of Base, very well
well,
used.
sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
you'll never hear that song ever the same way ever again. Um, you know,
And that is my biggest complaint, I mean, there's a lot to complain about, but my biggest complaint about X-Men Apocalypse, the movie, is that it's like, we're in the 80s. Let's just talk about the
Yeah,
80s. And it's like, shut up, dude. Like,
yeah, like it overdoes it.
and
Um,
and then they never mention it in Dark Phoenix, by the way. It's like, I guess
then
it's
and then
supposed, I
it's
mean,
the
it is the
90s.
90s, but it's like, other
It's
than Dazzler, like, there's nothing involved.
there's nothing very 90s about. Like it's weird. Those later, like I was talking about it with a friend online, like because I like those movies more than most people do, but like the fact that they just gave up on the idea that they were aged, like no, they didn't age those characters up the slightest. Like in Days of Future Past, it's like,
At
all right,
all.
whatever. It's 10 years. It's 10 years only later. You don't really have to age them up that much. But like once you start getting into like Dark Phoenix, it's like, okay, how does Michael Fassbender turn into Ian McKellen in 10 years? Like there's no, like they just didn't bother
Yeah.
because it's supposed
He
to be the
didn't
same
bother.
continuity. It's supposed to be the same continuity roughly, and they just didn't like give them like just do the standard Star Trek aging. Give them great temples and give them crow's feet. Like that's it. You don't have to go nuts, but like try to show us that it's been 30 years since this series, these flashback episodes of X-Men started, and no one has aged a day. Like that was so lazy. I hated that. Like I hated that. Um,
Yeah.
uh, Quicksilver didn't age in 20 years, apparently, you know. And I liked his Quicksilver. He's great. He's a better Quicksilver. But like
Yeah.
they just didn't like it was so lazy. I don't know, that drove me crazy. Most people don't
Yeah.
care about that stuff, but I was one of those people. It's like, no, like it's supposed to be of a piece. We're supposed to believe that these people become Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, and it would have been
Yeah.
fun to see them slowly become them, you know. Like it's a bad movie, but Star Trek Nemesis bothered to give Tom Hardy a, a Patrick Stewart nose. Like they did a prosthetic of, so like let's make them look as much alike as possible. Let's try to make this believable. And those X-Men movies just did not. Like they were just like, we don't care. The
And
actors don't want to be in makeup, so we're not going
no,
to do it.
it retroactively kind of makes First Class like crappier, because I think that movie's great.
Oh, I
And I
love
love,
First Class and Days of Future Past. I think they're great. Yeah.
and Days of Future Past is really good too, but it's like you, yeah, like you said, you can buy it's been a decade. Like
Yeah.
Charles looks like he has aged up
Yeah.
between First Class and Days of Future Past. You do not buy, other than him being bald, you do not buy at all that he's gotten 10 years older in
Apocalypse.
Apocalypse, and then
No.
yet another 10 years after that. It's like, no, and especially Michael Fassbender, like he does not,
Yeah. Not at all.
he doesn't
There's
look anything
nothing
like
that
him. Yeah.
indicates that he's going to become Ian McKellen in 10 years time, you know. And it would be
No,
one thing again if the original movies didn't exist and then you just pull the like, well, mutants age different than human. Like you could always pull that if you wanted, but they do
sure.
age because we've seen it. Like, you know, like the only one who doesn't is Wolverine and
Yeah.
Mystique. I guess Mystique doesn't. But yeah, we went on a tangent, but like that's something. But yeah, they overdid that. But I like
We did.
I like that this show didn't like lean so hard into the like the 90s of it, you know. Even though I do like
No.
that it's a period piece. Like I think we're gonna get more period piece stuff. I mean, because Batman Crepe Crusaders, like they're doing that too. They're like, I think we're at the point now too where it's like,
Yeah, it's
we've
40s.
seen so many
Yeah.
iterations of these comic book characters that like one of the cool things you can do is like, okay, well, let's change the setting. You know, even Spider-Man Noir, like
Mhm.
if they do that correctly, which they just announced, like that's another 30s thing. You know, it's a 19, like that's a fun thing to play with.
Yeah.
Because you can play with things of that time. You can play with, you know, the 60s, like all of these, you know, without just being like, oh, here's a pop song or something. It's like, okay, well, what was America like in the 60s? You know,
Yeah.
we changed a lot in that decade. Like that's a great way to do a superhero show that isn't, you know, just the same thing. I think we've seen so many contemporary superhero stuff that like it's a refreshing thing to do. I do wonder how far they'll go. Like, will every season be a time jump? Because it's 6 months later. So I don't think they're in 1997 anymore. Like they've got to be in 1998. Are we going to go to the 2000s? Are we going to see all of that? Are they going to reflect the Grant Morrison stuff? Because I think the Grant Morrison stuff is popular, but I don't think their costumes are popular. So I don't really know, because the costumes are trying to do
No.
of that time. We're trying to be the movies too much. I mean, if you ever read Grant Morrison's pitch for New X-Men, he literally was like, we need to make this like the movies. Like he was very much like, the movies have crossed over. That's so popular. We've got to do it we have to take a cue from what worked there. But I don't think now that would fly, with their little like biker jackets.
No,
But I mean,
but they
it's
could
wide
do.
open.
I
There's
mean,
so much stuff.
yeah, it's wide open, and there's lots. And I love the fact that we are at, not that all of these characters were brand new here, but I like the fact that, like, you know, Sunspot and Magic we know exist, and so it's like, okay, so the New Mutants could be a thing, or anything like that, and then Cable's there. Maybe he starts X Force proper and stuff like that. And like there's more
Yes,
there's more opportunity to do more teams, and I think
I would love that.
old X Factor, but also like the new X Factor characters. And I
Yeah.
like that they're all there. And that's one of, if you love X-Men, it's very likely that you read more books than just X-Men or Uncanny X-Men. Like, you probably read
Yes.
other offshoot team books. And that is a huge part of what being a fan of X-Men is. There's a million
Yeah.
teams because there's a million characters. And so I would love, I think we're getting it. I think the 3 time zone or timeline thing is a great way to do it, but we're going to need more characters than what we have in order to do that properly. And I think the first step is seeing who's on Forge's corkboard, but the other step is like, who else is out there? Like, who else wasn't on the corkboard that's there also?
Yeah. Well, I thought they were good about not Genosha was they didn't specifically give too many, like, this person's dead, that person's dead. We knew a couple of them.
Right.
Like, Moira's dead for sure. Dazzler's dead, which shocked me because, like, that show's a gay showrunner. I'm like, how did you kill Dazzler? I'm like, how dare you? I don't believe. I was like,
How
really?
dare you?
I was like, how dare you? Like, I did, like, but again, they can always come back. Like, that's just,
Yeah.
I was joking because online about, they just announced a Dazzler series, like her own like first comic series in decades.
Mhm.
And it's like her world tour, and she's going on world tour, and I'm like, all these like divas, they do a bunch of songs, and then they have the moment where they go and they talk to the audience, like, thousands of people, and it's like, I would love for Dazzler to just go out there and be like, I love you, all my fans. It's been I was eviscerated by a giant robot from the future, but you know what? I'm better now. And the crowd is like, yeah, you're better now. Like, I would love to see that moment for her. Because she was eviscerated by
Yeah.
a giant robot from the future. They showed it, like sliced her in
Oof.
half. But she's better. She's fine. She's on tour.
Not better.
Yeah, I got better. I always loved that about Krakoa. It made people crazy, but they just made it a feature, not a bug. Because
Yeah.
it was just a joke for years. Like, every X-Men who dies is not going to stay dead for more than a couple of years. Just make it official that they don't.
Yeah.
Like, just give them a reason for why, and like, I actually I do that's one of those instances where I do like the meta kind of stuff, which is just like,
Mhm.
they don't die. Why are we pretending that they're going to stay dead? I'm very curious as to how they're going to deal with the Charles and Eric of it all, because I didn't see them kind of coming to any kind of understanding after this.
No, I
The
didn't
second to
either.
last episode is like, oh, these two are never gonna, like, we're never gonna see them eye to eye again. Whether or not they're eye to eye that's up in the air, but they're gonna have to work together now because they're stuck in the same spot, right? Like, they're both,
Mhm.
in the past. So that's gonna be,
You know what? I wanted to bring this up, and I'd forgotten up until right now, but like, I think a great thing that the show did is that the ultimate solution, that they attempt anyway, it obviously doesn't work, is to try to be like, Bastion, you're a mutant. Like, why are we fighting? Like, there's no reason to fight
yeah,
against you. And it's just his own kind of personal hatred and self-loathing in a lot of ways. And wanting revenge is, and he kind of like laughs when they offer his, when Scott says, come give me your hand, and he just goes and he's like, I'd rather die, effectively. But
yeah,
I like that they were like, we can't just keep fighting this guy, he's too powerful, we need to join him because he is us. And I love that. I thought that was a
yeah.
very,
It was smart.
that and it's a very now thing to do. Like, obviously it takes place in the 90s, but like, it is a very now thing to not just absolutely or try to annihilate these characters, but instead
Yeah,
like reason with them and bring them into the fold. Because that's been one of my favorite things about the Krakoa era, is that former villains are now, Exodus was on the board. Exodus was on the board.
Exodus was on the board, and I keep forgetting about it because he's sort of not a joiner.
Right.
Like, it
Yeah.
would be sort of hard for me to imagine Forge being like, hey, want to Want to join an X-Men team? Because
Yeah.
that's such a weird character who's like 1,000 years old or something.
And
But maybe
he's literally an acolyte of Apocalypse,
he-
so it's like it seems
he's an
very unlikely
acolyte.
that he would want to do that, but maybe he was. Because in the comics, he
Maybe
is a true
we
blue
s-
believer in Hope Summers.
yes, yeah. I mean, they could do Hope Summer. It just did have to tweak things
They would,
because
absolutely,
there's no Wanda Maximoff No More Mutants thing for that to be like Hope. Hope would have to be something else. Like it
Yeah,
would. I don't know how they would do it, but that's a popular story. So
yeah,
you
and they
know,
would have to do something like, like using Forge's technology from the gun that, depowered to do that, and like on a genetic level, it's like now you can't even produce new mutants or anything like that. Like,
yeah, they might have to explain some stuff,
yeah,
but it would
but
be really cool. So
man, yeah, there's the
I'm gonna
world is
be in
their oyster,
withdrawal.
and
Yeah, it's gonna be
I know, me
hard, man.
too,
Like this is
me too.
it's been
It can be really hard.
weekly, which is like great. It's like we had, we always had something new to look forward to. They didn't do the thing where they dropped them all at once. Um, and it really was, and it was just I just noticed so many people were just like, it's like Saturday morning. I have my bowl of cereal and I'm watching, and it's like it's great. And I hope they don't overextend spin-offs or anything like that. I mean, I think everybody wants to see Spider-Man 98, but like other than that,
Sure.
I don't know that, you know, they have to do all these
Yeah, we don't
others.
need an Iron Man spinoff. We don't need a
No,
Fantastic Four spinoff. I don't think I don't think that will serve anything other than just like
yeah,
coffers. But like Spider-Man could use more story. There's more story to tell with Spider-Man.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, let X-Men be X-Men for a while. Like,
Let
they
X-Men
don't
be
have to.
X-Men. It's been so long since they've really had a spotlight like this.
Yeah.
And it's been great for those of us who like we remember when X-Men was the backbone of Marvel. Like they're the reason. We've said it before on different X-Men
Yeah.
podcasts, but like the reason we have everything modern Marvel anything. Because if X-Men the animated series wasn't successful, there would have been no movies, and without the X-Men movies being as successful, there wouldn't have been an MCU. You might have had Spider-Man. I think that was
Hmm.
probably going to happen no matter what. But X-Men proved that you could
Yeah.
do these big ensemble superhero movies that were pretty serious, that weren't jokey. You know what I mean? And like their success paved the way for the MCU, and they wouldn't have happened without the cartoon. Like,
Yep.
so they're very much the backbone, and it's nice to be reminded of that. And I hope that the MCU takes storytelling cues from them. I
Hmm.
wouldn't mind if whatever they end up doing with the live action X-Men is largely informed by this. Like, that would be great. I wouldn't mind if it was the same team.
Yeah.
um I mean, they sort of
I
have
I
an
love all.
issue. Like I've talked with other X-Men fans because they sort of feel like the comics and the cartoons always default to the same lead X-Men, and most of them are white and straight.
Hmm.
And I sort of think that's a comics problem, because it's a modern comics problem. Because I've always thought the reason that this handful, 15, maybe 20 X-Men characters are seen as the iconic ones that you need to have is because for almost 20 years, you knew if you picked up an X-Men comic that those characters were going to be in it. You could follow. I mean, there really wasn't, when Claremont was on it, there wasn't that much turnover in terms of the team.
Mm-mm.
Not really. And if someone left, they had another book that they were in that you could pick up. But then in the modern era, what you have is writers come on these books. They're on it for 2 to 3 years. They have their little favorite characters and they introduce new characters. But the minute that writer leaves, those new characters are gone, and the next writer just defaults to, no one sticks around long enough to become iconic as an X-Men. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I don't feel like, and that's the fault of Marvel. They should kind of be like, whenever they get a new writer, be like, okay, but you have to pick up the torch from what this other writer was doing, and they've been developing this character. You can't just throw them away because you want to do your childhood favorites. You have to keep developing them. And they've had a tough time doing
Yeah.
that. They've had a really tough time. And so I think because of that, there hasn't been as many newer X-Men characters. Maybe Emma Frost, but Emma Frost is a Claremont character. That's another character from
Hmm.
that era. So it's unfortunate. And I hope that
Yeah.
when the MCU comes out,
It,
that they're going to have to really ask themselves, like, do you want to do the iconic characters, or do you want to like diversify this? Because the iconic characters are largely white people. I mean, you can always change that too, but I don't know. It's something that all X-Men media is going to have to kind of like deal with.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to see how they do. Um, so I don't know. I
Yeah.
just want Iceman next season. Let's have one gay X-Man, like just one.
I mean, Morph.
Morph, but Morph's non-binary, so
Yeah.
he's on this. Yeah, he's in the LGBTQ, but like I would like just one, just standard variety, like standard issue gay dude on the
We
team
saw
or
North
woman
Star for half a second.
for half a second. He was at Aurora was at Gambit's funeral, and I don't know why. Like, are they tight? Like, I thought that was weird. Like, I was like, oh, okay, hi, Aurora from Alpha Flight. She's there. Yeah, and they confirmed. Bo DeMeo confirmed. He's like, yeah, it's Aurora from Alpha Flight. I'm like, they know each other? I'm like, okay, cool.
That is weird.
Because Storm wasn't
I
there.
don't remember
That's
that, but
another thing the show kind of didn't do. Like, where was Storm for like 2 episodes? There was like
yeah.
Storm finds out about Genosha, and then there's like 2 whole episodes where like Gambit's funeral happens and all this stuff. I'm like, I know phones existed in the 90s. Like they could have contact like someone, no one called. Like I know that everybody didn't
Yeah.
have a smartphone. That wasn't a thing yet, but you could have found out. Like it was weird that there was a chunk of episodes where like Storm wasn't there. I was a little disappointed that Storm in the last episode didn't get to like, go nuts. Like I feel like they kind of, we saw what she can do earlier, and they didn't really
Yeah.
have her at full power in this last one. But then again, it's sort of the Jean problem. If they could really go full power, then it's over for everybody.
Yeah.
It's sort of the Superman problem in Justice League. It's like, well, if you just like untie his hands, then your story is over.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
Storm and Jean is kind of like that too. So
You have
yeah, I'm
to
gonna be
go out of
sad.
your way to nerf these characters.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna be sad also. I'm gonna be sad. But we got a great 10-episode season. I'm gonna
Yeah.
watch it again. I think probably multiple times between now and when the next one comes
Yeah.
out. And just like it's like X-Men fans are eating really, really well. I'm really interested to see like how, we largely know how the Krakoa era is wrapping up, but seeing the end of that in the comics and the new, the From the Ashes era and everything like that. Dazzler, Storm, Phoenix all getting their own solo books is really
Yeah.
exciting. And yeah, I just think, and the promise on the horizon of the X-Men joining the MCU, I think like there's a lot of really great things to be excited about if you're a fan
Yeah.
of X stuff. And,
Yeah.
it's been a long time coming, I think. So
Yeah. This show was a gift.
Yeah.
It really was. And I'm
was a
happy we
gift.
have it at all, but I'm even more excited that we have more, because I definitely think we're going to get a
It's
third
on.
and fourth season out of this. So
Oh,
yay.
I think so. It's such a big hit. And the
Yeah.
merch has been selling like crazy too. So I think
Yeah.
that's the other thing. It's a cash
I
cow
was
for
just
them.
surprised they weren't at, like, again, I was so shocked that they weren't at California Adventure at Avengers Campus. That shows me they didn't
Yeah.
know, that they just were caught,
No.
unawares that this was going to be. Because I'm like, yeah, you got to have Cyclops and Wolverine out there taking pictures with kids. I would go. Like you had Nick Fury from Secret
Yes,
Invasion that nobody cared about, but like you didn't have the X-Men. Come on. Come on.
I mean, they have to make a whole new set of costumes, I think is the issue. Like putting the Nick Fury actor in a beanie is much easier than making a whole Cyclops costume.
They do it. They did it for They did it for the fact that they did it for Werewolf by Night and not X-Men is like, Werewolf by Night is a one shot. Like you're not even like, this would have promoted the show over the whole course of it being on, and they just didn't. Again, I don't think they because it was a cartoon. They're like, oh, this is going to be just for like these hardcore fans, and no one's going to watch it. And it's like everybody watched it.
Yeah,
so yeah. So who knows? We'll see.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric, as always, for being on here to talk about X-Men with me. How can people find your stuff on the internet and the stuff that you write? Like you wrote a ton about X-Men. Go back and read all that. But how can people find your stuff on the internet?
At GeekBoyAir on Twitter. GeekBoy Eric, and GeekBoy Eric is my email. GeekBoy Eric on Twitter and Instagram. That's pretty much where you can find me. And yes, I have many X-Men articles and more to come.
Absolutely.
X-Men. We've been eating.
Oh my God. It's
yeah.
If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can at functional_nerd. You can follow me on Letterboxd, Kyle_Anderson, or you can write to the show at laserfocus at Gmail. No, nope, not Gmail. Laserfocus at nerdist.com. Until next time, where I have been Kyle Anderson. Thank you for listening to Laser Focus. Join me again next week when my guest will be a different person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit nerdist.com.